It took exactly 52 seconds for the atmosphere in the Senate hearing room to shift from careful expectation to complete stillness. Kash Patel's fingers trembled slightly as he shuffled a stack of documents, his eyes flicking nervously toward Pam Bondi, who sat beside him with a taut expression, jaw clenched, posture rigid. Across the polished mahogany table, the senator's gaze bore into them, calm yet unyielding, signaling that every word, every hesitation, would be scrutinized. Cameras clicked, flashes reflected sharply off the table's lacquered surface, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights seemed to pulse with the room's tension. The chamber itself embodied authority. Tall marble columns framed the entrances, their veined surfaces gleaming under the harsh light, while portraits of historic legislative moments lined the walls, silent witnesses to this unfolding drama. Microphones extended from the tables, capturing every whisper, every slight cough. A subtle draft from the ventilation system caused papers to rattle, and pens scratched quietly across legal pads, marking notes that would later form the backbone of public and institutional analysis. The air was dense with anticipation, charged with both the moral and legal gravity of the moment. Patel's eyes scanned the room, briefly landing on the press gallery where cameras were tightly clustered, lenses trained like hawks. Bondi's hands rested flat on the table, fingers interlaced, betraying only the slightest tremor. Every staffer and aide shifted subtly, their movements almost imperceptible but amplified under the chamber's reflective surfaces. Here, even the smallest gesture, a pen lifted, a note passed, could signal a shift in control or perception. The stakes were enormous. Reports indicated a $1 billion discrepancy in federal budget allocations, funds that had been internally flagged but concealed from Congress. The legal implications were vast: potential violations of the Appropriations Act, administrative malfeasance, and breaches of statutory duty. Beyond the procedural, the constitutional stakes loomed: oversight authority of Congress versus the administrative discretion of executive-appointed officials. FISA audits, due process clauses, and reporting obligations under federal law were silent, ever-present specters. The chamber remained hushed, but tension manifested in detail. A clerk adjusted Patel's microphone, a faint hiss of feedback lingering before settling. Cameras whirred softly, capturing every micro-expression. The senators, experienced in both political theater and legal precision, mirrored the atmosphere. Slight tightening of fists under the table, brief glances at each other, the subtle tapping of pens against mahogany. Every detail conveyed authority, every silence suggested expectation, and every flash of light reinforced scrutiny. Patel exhaled slowly, attempting composure. Bondi's eyes darted briefly toward the documents before her, lips pressed together in a hard line. The chamber seemed to shrink, the marble walls pressing inward with invisible weight. They were on the precipice. One misstatement, one failed justification, could trigger legal, political, and public consequences of historic magnitude. And yet, despite the careful calm, the undercurrent of imminent exposure was undeniable. The $1 billion hidden from scrutiny, the memos, the unaccounted expenditures, all poised to surface in precise legal and cinematic detail. But the silence wasn't over yet. The first question was quiet, measured, almost conversational, but beneath it lurked a sharpened edge. Senator Grace Whitman's voice cut cleanly through the hum of fluorescent lights. Mr. Patel, Ms. Bondi, can you confirm whether all budget allocations for the past fiscal year complied fully with the Appropriations Act, including Section 503(b) reporting requirements? Patel's hand twitched slightly as he adjusted his papers. Senator, all expenditures were approved according to internal procedures, he replied, voice calm but taut, eyes flicking toward Bondi as if seeking reinforcement. Massey leaned forward, calm but precise. Mr. Patel, Section 503(b) explicitly prohibits any expenditure without congressional approval. Were any operations conducted or funds allocated outside final authorized budgets? A subtle pause. Patel's fingers drummed nervously on the table, pen hovering mid-air. Senator, I believe all operations were authorized internally, he said, the conviction in his tone thinning with each word. Whitman shifted slightly, voice soft but relentless. Ms. Bondi, Internal audits indicate irregularities totaling nearly $1 billion. Were you aware of these discrepancies before today's hearing? Bondi's lips pressed together, jaw tight. Her hands, resting on the table, clenched momentarily before relaxing. Senator, I was informed of preliminary concerns, but I was not directly responsible for reconciliations or reporting, she said, measured yet defensive. The senator's questioning was surgical. Each sentence was a scalpel, dissecting both compliance and intent. Eyes tracked micro-expressions, noting fleeting hesitation, slight shifts in posture, and subtle hand tremors. Even the quiet scratch of a pen or the faint tapping of a shoe across marble floors felt amplified in the charged room. Mass's voice cut through the tension, low and deliberate. Mr. Patel, according to your own memos, several internal budgets were redacted or delayed. Can you account for why these reports were withheld from congressional review? Patel's throat tightened. His gaze flickered toward the documents, then back to Massey. Senator, the delays were procedural, he said, voice taut. There was no intent to mislead Congress. Whitman's pen scratched sharply against her pad, punctuating the silence. Mr. Patel, intent does not absolve statutory responsibility. Were any funds reallocated or used without proper authorization? Patel's hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table, knuckles pale under the fluorescent glare. Senator, any reallocations were handled internally. I cannot confirm every transaction personally. Massey leaned in slightly, eyes unblinking. Ms. Bondi, were you informed when these internal reallocations occurred? Did you approve them? Bondi's eyes darted momentarily toward Patel, then to the senators. Senator, I reviewed summaries but did not approve individual adjustments, she said, calm but visibly tense. The tension in the room was palpable. Every flicker of eyelid, every micro-expression, every soft intake of breath became evidence in itself. Cameras clicked intermittently, capturing each subtle tremor, each hesitation. The senators were patient but relentless, weaving legality and moral accountability into every question. One question threatened to topple the facade. The room's temperature felt heavier as internal memos, audit summaries, and redacted budget reports were laid before Patel and Bondi. The camera captured every detail. The way Patel's fingers brushed nervously over the papers, the slight tightening of Bondi's jaw, the reflective glare of fluorescent light on the polished mahogany table. Each document carried weight, a billion-dollar discrepancy hidden within layers of administrative red tape. Senator Diego Marquez tapped his pen methodically. Mr. Patel, these internal audit reports indicate unaccounted transfers totaling $1 billion, bypassing Standard Appropriations Act procedures. Can you explain why these reallocations were not reported to Congress as required under Section 503(b)? Patel swallowed, throat tight. Senator, I was aware of preliminary allocations, but I did not personally oversee the final reconciliations. Mass's gaze was unwavering, deliberate. Mr. Patel, Section 503(b) is explicit. All federal expenditures require congressional review. Failing to report or concealing funds constitutes both statutory and administrative violation. Were these omissions intentional or a result of negligence? Bondi shifted slightly, placing both hands flat on the table. Senator, there was no intent to mislead. Any omissions were due to procedural confusion and internal miscommunication, she said, measured but tense. Whitman interjected, her tone calm but piercing. Mr. Patel, internal communications suggest that some transfers were accelerated or concealed specifically to avoid scrutiny. How do you reconcile this with your claim of procedural compliance? Patel's fingers drummed against the edge of the table. His voice wavered. Senator, I believed all actions were within internal guidelines, though I admit that some reporting timelines were not strictly followed. Massey produced a set of memos, sliding them across the table. Mr. Patel, these memos explicitly outline adjustments to budget allocations that were neither communicated to congressional committees nor documented in final approvals. Failing to comply with these reporting obligations violates both the Appropriations Act and the principle of transparency essential to due process. Were you aware of these directives? Patel's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the papers, eyes flicking to Bondi. Senator, yes, I saw the memos, but I believed oversight was being maintained through internal channels, he admitted, voice strained. Whitman's pen scratched sharply against her legal pad. Ms. Bondi, did you review these memos prior to today? Did you authorize or endorse any of these concealed reallocations? Bondi hesitated, a flicker of tension passing across her features. Senator, I reviewed summaries but did not approve individual line-item adjustments, she said. Her voice remained calm, but the slightest tremor betrayed her composure. Marquez leaned forward, tone precise. The Fifth Amendment protects against governmental overreach. If funds were concealed or misallocated intentionally, those protections were compromised. Do you acknowledge the potential constitutional implications of these omissions? Patel's gaze faltered. He shifted in his seat, the papers in front of him suddenly heavier. The senator's questioning had evolved beyond procedure into legal accountability, blending statutory language, constitutional duty, and moral responsibility. Internal memos, missing reports, and unaccounted transfers revealed a web of contradictions. Every glance, every subtle gesture in the chamber, the flicker of Patel's eyes, the tension in Bondi's shoulders, the hum of fluorescent lights, amplified the rising narrative. The room had become a cinematic crucible of legal and political scrutiny. The truth was unraveling, line by line. It began with a single, fractured pause. Patel's eyes darted between the memos and the senators, a microsecond of hesitation that felt stretched across eternity. Cameras clicked relentlessly, each flash illuminating the sweat forming at his hairline, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hands. Bondi's fingers drummed nervously on the polished mahogany, her posture rigid yet betraying tension. For 52 seconds, the chamber became a study in legal and emotional unraveling. Mass's voice cut through, calm, deliberate, unyielding. Mr. Patel, you have claimed full compliance with the Appropriations Act and all internal procedures. Yet these memos, these redacted budgets, and the audit reports indicate $1 billion in unreported reallocations. How do you reconcile this? Patel's lips parted, then closed. His voice cracked under scrutiny. Senator, there must be. Words failed him, sentences dissolving into stammered fragments. The narrative he had rehearsed, the careful defenses he had relied upon, evaporated under the combined weight of statutes, memos, and unwavering eyes. Whitman's pen scratched sharply, accentuating the silence. Mr. Patel, Section 503(b) of the Appropriations Act mandates reporting and congressional approval for all federal expenditures. Failing to disclose or concealing these reallocations constitutes both statutory violation and obstruction of oversight. How do you explain your failure to comply? Patel's hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale beneath the harsh fluorescent glare. The memos, spreadsheets, and internal emails lay before him, each document a precise record of omissions, each line a testament to legal exposure. He attempted to speak again, but his voice faltered. Senator, the approvals. I thought. Mass's gaze did not waver. Mr. Patel, this is a direct violation of statutory and constitutional obligations. Due process was compromised, oversight bypassed, and transparency disregarded. Do you acknowledge your failure? For 52 seconds, the room held its breath. The cameras captured every flicker of uncertainty. Patel's shallow breaths, Bondi's tight grip on her notes, the glint of fluorescent light reflecting sharply off her glasses. The senators remained statuesque, absorbing the weight of the collapse, their silence emphasizing every misstep. Finally, Patel's shoulders slumped, a physical concession of defeat. The failure was total, not merely a lapse of memory or procedure, but a profound legal and administrative collapse. He had violated reporting obligations, obscured appropriations, and undermined congressional oversight, acts that could not be reconciled or excused. The constitutional and statutory framework was unambiguous. His testimony was legally indefensible. Bondi exhaled quietly, a tension-filled acknowledgement that the exposure was now complete. The chamber's silence pressed against them like marble walls closing in. Every legal principle, every oversight mechanism, every constitutional protection they had ignored now reflected back in unyielding clarity. And in those 52 seconds, everything changed. By the time Patel and Bondi exited the Senate chamber, the consequences had already ignited a nationwide political storm. News anchors dissected the 52-second collapse with clinical intensity. Constitutional scholars called it the most devastating oversight failure in decades. One anchor intoned, replaying the shaky hands, faltering words, and trembling composure of Patel. Another added, for 52 seconds, America witnessed a billion-dollar cover-up unravel in real time. Social media amplified every micro-expression. Patel's hand tremor, Bondi's tightening jaw, the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Analysts, political commentators, and former federal investigators replayed the memos and budget reports, debating potential Appropriations Act violations, breaches of reporting obligations, and the obstruction of congressional oversight. Hashtags such as #budgetbreach and #Senate exposure trended within hours, accompanied by video clips dissecting every second of the hearing. Inside the FBI, internal briefings convened immediately. Senior officials examined every line of the memos, tracing the concealed reallocations, unreported transfers, and redacted budgets. How did this go unnoticed? One agent whispered, voice taut with disbelief. Discussions moved rapidly from accountability to system reform. Which operational checks had failed, and how could oversight be restored without political compromise? Capitol Hill felt the tremors acutely. Senate committees called for emergency sessions, DOJ officials were summoned for statements, and aides drafted memos analyzing the ramifications of a billion-dollar concealment. Law journals, think tanks, and public policy forums debated the intersection of administrative discretion and statutory obligation. The legal stakes were clear. Section 503(b) of the Appropriations Act had been circumvented, due process and transparency obligations compromised, and congressional oversight challenged directly. Patel's reputation lay in ruins. Once considered a rising figure in federal operations, his credibility had been publicly dismantled. Political operatives noted that any future statements he made on federal oversight would be met with skepticism. Bondi's standing also suffered. Colleagues spoke in hushed tones about the peril of mismanaging statutory responsibilities, even at the highest levels of authority. In contrast, Massey emerged as the embodiment of meticulous oversight. Analysts praised his measured approach, legal precision, and unwavering calm. The narrative presented him as a guardian of accountability, a figure whose quiet, unyielding questions had revealed systemic failures with surgical clarity. Public discourse shifted from spectacle to principle. Citizens debated the fragility of oversight, the role of executive discretion, and the importance of statutory compliance. Classrooms, political forums, and newsrooms dissected the hearings footage as a cautionary tale. Legal and moral accountability is relentless, and institutional safeguards exist for a reason. Calls for reform grew louder. Proposals for stricter reporting protocols, enhanced oversight mechanisms, and transparent fiscal management gained traction. Patel and Bondi had become a case study in the consequences of neglecting statutory and constitutional duty, but the broader lesson extended beyond individuals to the machinery of governance itself. The public scrutiny had only begun. Weeks later, the Senate chamber had returned to its usual rhythm, yet the memory of the 52-second collapse lingered like a shadow across the marble floors. The polished mahogany tables reflected the soft daylight streaming through tall windows, but the chamber now carried a quieter, sober energy. Legal scholars, policy analysts, and lawmakers dissected the hearing endlessly, not for drama, but for the lessons embedded in procedural failure, statutory oversight, and moral responsibility. The implications were profound. For all its cinematic spectacle, the collapse had exposed vulnerabilities in the system. The human capacity for error, the thin veneer of authority when untempered by accountability, and the enduring power of law to impose clarity amid complexity. Failing to comply with the Appropriations Act, concealing budget reallocations, and bypassing reporting obligations had real, measurable consequences. The due process clauses, congressional oversight powers, and statutory mandates remained immutable, unyielding, impartial. Mass's role remained emblematic of diligent oversight. His calm precision and measured questions had revealed not just procedural lapses, but the ethical weight of public office. He reminded the nation that scrutiny is not symbolic. It is constitutional, legal, and moral. Yet the episode also highlighted the fragility of authority. Titles, status, and confidence mean little when checks and balances are ignored. Legality is indifferent to personal narrative or intention. Patel and Bondi receded from the public eye. Their careers, once poised for influence within federal operations, were irrevocably altered. They became case studies in oversight failure, their public downfall a cautionary tale for administrators, legislators, and students of governance. Internal reviews, policy reforms, and increased transparency initiatives followed, but the individuals themselves had become symbols of the consequences of neglecting statutory and constitutional duty. The broader lesson resonated beyond Capitol Hill. Citizens, policy forums, and law classrooms absorbed the narrative. Accountability is unrelenting, transparency is essential, and institutional frameworks exist to prevent abuse and maintain public trust. The 52 seconds of collapse, captured in meticulous detail, had left a permanent imprint, not as sensationalism, but as a stark reflection of law meeting human imperfection. As the sunlight slanted across the chamber, casting long shadows over the polished tables and empty chairs, one truth crystallized. Systems endure, even when individuals fail. Washington does not punish ignorance. It replaces it. Some careers end in scandal. Their silence echoed through the corridors of power.